Companies got complacent during the 2010s. They came to believe that if they did digital marketing well enough, they'd get leads and sales would just have to close those leads. And that hasn't panned out. But instead of adjusting, most are just trying to do more of the same, hoping that doing more of it faster will somehow fix the problem. Hi, I'm Ed Marsh, host of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. And today I'm exercising host prerogative for a different kind of episode, similar to last week. It was only me sharing some thoughts. Last week it was a review of 2024 episodes. This week is an episode I've spent a lot of time thinking about that I believe sets the stage for a lot of what we need to talk about in 2025. Next week, I'll be back with guests and be excited about a number of episodes already recorded, and those are coming up for recording. But today, we're going to talk about secular changes that I believe are taking place in B2B buying that require adaptation in industrial marketing and industrial sales, but they're happening slowly. And so it might not necessarily be obvious what we need to do. So I'm going to spend some time explaining what I'm seeing, explaining the background, and talking a bit about what I think we need to do. Let's start understanding just some context. Obviously, we're all accustomed to cycles in business. They come and go. We adapt and we readjust. There's market cycles of boom and recession. We know Gartner's hype cycle. That's certainly a familiar example. But also think about simple things like marketing tactics, like banner ads, or these obnoxious breakup emails to conclude sales sequences. Those are cycles. No different really than fashion trends like bell bottoms or lapel widths that get wide and narrow and wide again. The essence of cycles is that things revert to a mean. So this fosters certain biases that we have as business people, namely recency and normalcy bias, because we see these fluctuations, but we know that basically things come back to what we're accustomed to. And so we reasonably project that we're familiar with what we can see into the future. And of course, cycles can happen within cycles. We can think about the stock market's daily ups and downs within a broader bull or bear market over time. And the reality is that sometimes trends can transcend these cycles. So a trend or a secular change, if you will, is really a fundamental shift. It can be a shift in societal norms or business best practice, whatever. So cycles may swing above and below the trend line, reverting to mean, but the secular trend is basically that mean. And the secular trend tends to stay intact for a long time until it doesn't. So let's talk about a secular trend in industrial sales and marketing. Sometimes cycles can appear to be secular changes. They seem really significant. They carry a lot of momentum that we feel in our gut just is so significant, can't be temporary. And that leads to a classic, this time is different sort of thinking. And it's mocked precisely because it almost never is. But secular changes are subtle. They happen gradually. The trend line shifts gradually compared to the abrupt changes of cycles. And that makes it hard to recognize. If we think about the change from the way an industrial economy emerged from the agrarian one, or how personal computers transformed business operations, those weren't cycles. Those were fundamental shifts that permanently altered how business operates. And companies that recognized those changes early positioned themselves to ride long-term waves. Those that waited until the shifts were obvious found themselves struggling to catch up, and often entered a period of gradual deterioration that was hard to escape from. So we can think about kind of contemporary marketing and selling in, I'd say, 3 periods. The first was a long one, 1895 to 2005. Marketing and sales as we know them are products of the mid-20th century. We can debate exact dates and exact originators, but certain milestones stand out pretty clearly. Bernays' 1928 book, Propaganda, introduced many of the concepts of contemporary marketing. McCarthy introduced the 4 Ps in 1960. Kotler quickly formalized and refined modern marketing theory over the following couple decades. The American Marketing Association was formed in 1935. The launch of the Journal of Marketing in 1936 kind of marked a formalization of the discipline. We can see similar things if we trace the origin of sales as a distinct business function to really the early 20th century, late 19th, early 20th. NCR pioneered sales training based on scientific salesmanship. Carnegie's seminal, How to Win Friends and Influence People appeared in 1937. Xerox rolled out professional selling skills in 1968, and with that, they ushered in an era of refined methodology and structure and process. But marketing and sales are only one side of the equation. Buyers get a say too. They're the other side of the equation. The National Association of Purchasing Agents was established in 1915. The rise of improved manufacturing rigor in the 70s and 80s really demanded that procurement evolve to focus on quality and delivery. And then globalization introduced supply chain concepts. So for nearly a century, one thing was constant. There was information asymmetry. And that information asymmetry defined the relationship. Business buyers had limited resources. They had yellow pages, industry trade journals. They had a Thomas Register, which was actually first published in 1898. And those helped to identify possible vendors. And it kind of was the first step for buyers to learn about offerings and capabilities. They had to have direct meetings. So they had to use those methods to find potential vendors, invite them in, have meetings with salespeople, and sales and marketing controlled access to information. That created an environment for what some people call the manipulation upon which much of the marketing and sales is believed to have been built, and it created a lot of the resentment and a lot of the feelings about salespeople that you hear to this day, and a lot of the descriptions of marketing. But that was a century long, or maybe a century and a quarter, 125 years, say 1895 to 2005. So I guess about 110 years. I would argue that 2005 to 2020 was the next secular change in sales and marketing. Obviously, the internet. Now, when you talk to marketing and sales professionals today, they often see the internet through the lens of how it helps them market and sell more effectively. I mean, they can talk about websites and SEO and email and intent data and chatbots and CRM and tools that enhance their ability to push information to buyers. But those tools didn't work on their own. The reason they worked is because buyers were hungry for information. They were eager to escape the manipulative sales practices. And the early winners were companies who ensured that as buyers asked questions, first kind of asking themselves questions, thinking about things, ruminating, and then asking Google the questions, these companies succeeded, made sure that their answers were readily available as definitive information. That led to the era of inbound marketing. And that contrasted with the earlier era of outbound or interruption marketing and sales. HubSpot took a lead. They really codified the practice and democratized the tools and best practices for thousands of companies that were intrigued by inbound marketing. Early movers that did a good job with SEO research and content creation, they staked large claims in keyword dominance using rudimentary techniques that eventually evolved in response to Google updates that were in turn prompted by changing user behaviors and expectations. But there was a pretty straightforward playbook. You anticipate the questions prospects might ask. You research the keywords, likely representing those questions or indicative of those questions. You create optimized content answering those questions and publish it on a technically optimized website. Use calls to action, promising a deeper insight in a downloadable offer in order to convert visitors to leads, and then you nurture those leads to become customers. And from 2005 until 2020, this worked pretty consistently. Companies had to adjust as technology advanced and Google evolved, but it remained pretty straightforward. Around 2013, a few blog posts and some social media activity were enough to dramatically boost business for even small operations. Basically, if you tried, it worked. So that was another secular trend. Thoughtful companies invested in this changing technical opportunity to meet buyers in their changing behaviors. Now, not all companies did. One of the things about a secular change is it happens slowly. You don't have to adapt immediately. You may not even realize it immediately. So there was many companies that were laggards. They were slow to embrace the internet and search or organic traffic for lead generation. Many were late to add websites, and when they did, their sites were often just essentially online brochures. So, secular change happened slowly. Now, in this case, it was relatively brief compared to the previous one because it's given way to another. And let's explore this newest secular change and the forces that are reshaping the landscape. I would argue it began 2020 roughly, and it's a function of COVID and AI and evolving buyer behavior. So let's talk about COVID first. Books are going to be written on this, but for our purpose, all we need to do is basically focus on how accelerated changes in buying and selling. When face-to-face meetings suddenly became impossible, online meetings and digital approaches, they weren't just options anymore. They were the only way to reach buyers. This triggered a frenzy in marketing and sales technology adoption. Really a blow-off top, if you will, after a decade-long trend of embracing technology. But the pendulum kind of began to swing back as companies became aware of subscription bloat and unused applications. And in many cases, the same companies whose products promised to improve sales efficiency actually began slashing their own spending on technology. So there was an urge to boost efficiency by using carefully refined best practices and increasing the volume of outreach. We saw the rise of BDRs. We saw the amazing growth of sales acceleration companies like SalesLoft. So folks were looking for technology to double down and do more sales and marketing with the same number of people. And then AI came. The most immediate impact of AI is probably in content creation. Suddenly, the barrier to writing large volumes of content or publishing numerous social media posts dropped to, maybe just a $20 subscription and some practice writing prompts. So the volume of content that was already overwhelming to buyers exploded. Firmly embedded in many companies because of the last secular change was this mindset that content is king. And so most didn't seem to really notice that less and less of their traditional written content was actually being consumed by buyers. They just had this compulsion. They had to create more of it. But by January of 2025, SEO research tool company SEMrush published extensive research showing that Google is as likely to rank AI content as human created content. They saw that as an advantage, or they use that to promote their AI content creation. I would argue that their research stopped at rankings and ignored the really critical question. Was that content even getting clicked? Were visitors engaging further or even converting? The trend suggests not, that ranking for keywords by using an increasing volume of AI created content, that's kind of a Pyrrhic victory because nothing's following behind that. At the same time, AI changed buyer search behaviors. So while bottom of the funnel searches for products continue on Google, information searches for education and research increasingly move to large language models like Perplexity. And even Google, of course, provides an AI overview that answers most questions directly. One of the big changes in parallel has been how companies make complex buying decisions. That's fundamentally changed as well. Most sales training still focuses on finding and reaching a decision maker, and that executives in the corner office, who maybe consider input from their team, but then make a final call, are the decision maker. And there's no doubt in companies, there remains one person with the authority to reallocate funds. They're, in my experience, much less inclined to wield that power unilaterally, though. Today, most decisions are made by committee consensus. So the real decision makers are the committees, which often must agree unanimously to proceed. A single dissenter can often derail a project, and everyone has to agree to proceed. Leaders and managers often hesitate to exercise their decision-making authority. Even when they disagree with the committee, they'd prefer to just kind of accede to the committee's judgment to avoid dissension or passive-aggressive resistance. And we see that buying teams are growing rapidly. Over the last decade, they've expanded from somewhere around 3 to 5 to often as many as 12 to 15 people. Each member brings personal preferences and biases, and each often represents a department that may prefer to allocate limited capital to their own priorities rather than to the sponsor's initiative that they're sitting on this committee for. So the result is that committees are unwieldy. The craving for consensus means that a smaller percentage of initiatives are actually undertaken. And most deals, somewhere between 40 and 60% by most research, end in no decision because of that. We can really understand the magnitude of the problem by digging into numbers, and the impact is stark and it's measurable. And let's start on digital marketing. SparkToro research shows a startling reality. Only about 29% of all Google searches ever result in a click on an organic search result. Another 9% go to other Google properties like YouTube or images, and about 0.4% to sponsored results. That means that nearly 60% of all searches go nowhere. Users either find their answer in Google's AI overview or they just go to another search. And that's before we account for research that's happening in large language models, completely bypassing Google. So in other words, the SEO and content marketing play that works so well for that last secular change, the last decade, at best, it's only about 40% as effective now as it was 5 years ago, because only 40% of Google searches are going anywhere. But in reality, it's even less effective because of the difficulty of securing and maintaining rankings in the zero-sum game, which makes it much harder to earn or preserve rankings. And that explains why nearly every middle market industrial company has seen their rankings and traffic decline. But it gets worse because buyers have become jaded toward form conversions and the typical nurturing and sales follow-up that they've been conditioned to expect. They often won't submit a form. They expect ungated content, which means no leads, just because they don't want to be harassed by salespeople who say, oh, well, because you downloaded that, you must be getting ready to buy something and we need to set up a discovery meeting. So even with the declining traffic, conversion rates are falling faster, and so there's a steep drop in inbound leads. More SparkToro research indicates that 44% of searches are for brands. So in other words, buyers have already self-diagnosed and identified possible solutions. They're not looking to learn about the problem. They're not looking to learn about the solution. They know who they want to talk to, a short list of 3 people. Now they're using search, they're navigating to figure out how to get in touch with those companies. While informational keywords are nearly 70% of all keywords, they represent just over 50% of actual searches. So in other words, the efforts to reach the buyers early on are expanding. Lots of people chasing those keywords, but they're getting much less traffic. And searches around heavy industry and engineering comprise just 0.3% of Google volume. We're not selling sneakers in the industrial world. I think a quote from SparkToro's report on this, and Rand Fishkin, is key. And I quote here: Google has become a place people go after they discover a need, rather than a demand creation or even demand nudging platform. So in other words, the idea that you can write lots of blog articles about long tail, top of the funnel topics that will spark curiosity and lead prospects through an educational journey culminating in a purchase, that model is really simply untenable. Now, there's a lot of metrics and data about sales too that I think are equally alarming. We can turn to research from Pavilion and Trust Radius that did some work together, and also Sixth Sense about how companies actually buy. Let's look at some of those numbers. Most complex big ticket buying journeys stretch beyond 8 months. In 87% of cases, buyers initiate first contact with vendors, and they only do so once they're 65% of the way through their buying journey. When vendors make first contact, counterintuitively, their win rate plummets. The winning vendor is contacted first 81% of the time. Now, is that causation or correlation? I can't tell you, but that's a statistic that Sixth Sense has found. Buying teams consider an average of 4 vendors in the manufacturing space. A typical deal involves 350 interactions between buyers and sellers. 84% of the time, specifications and requirements are locked in before speaking to vendors. Around 80% of the time, Only vendors known to buyers before they begin research make it on the short list. And 71% of the time, the vendor at the top of the short list wins the order. This data tells us something profound. Waiting for buyers to find us is increasingly futile. Yet reaching out to them too early can be actively harmful if you're reaching out when they're in their buying process. So if our revenue growth model is predicated on engaging with buyers who have active projects, which statistically I've heard numbers 3% up to 30%, in any event, it's a small portion. That means we face a really narrow window, literally just 2 weeks in an 8-month buying journey when we can successfully engage them. Now, different solution providers are going to seize on this data to make different points. Branding agencies will highlight the importance of brand awareness. In other words, you need to be known before they have a project, and branding is a way to do that. Intent data companies will argue that their tools are key to identifying that crucial 2 to 4 week window. I think those are short-sighted. I think when we consider revenue growth as an integrated system, like overall revenue effectiveness and that framework that I offer companies, we understand that we need an integrated solution. So at a high level, middle market industrial companies need to start doing two things. They need to reach buyers long before those buyers are thinking about buying, before there's a project. And they need to improve the ability to create buying projects rather than just react to them. Let's look at both of these in a little bit more detail. And let's start by thinking about kind of rethinking marketing and trust. The old playbook of SEO optimized blog posts and gated content, it's not dead, but it can no longer be our primary strategy. We need content that meets today's buyer where they are, according to their consumption habits. SparkToro's research into search indicates that buyers aren't broadly, actively searching, and therefore probably not reading informational articles about high-level pre-awareness and awareness kind of topics up front. They're absolutely overwhelmed with content, much of which, honestly, they've come to expect is rather vapid. However, they are consuming video and audio content, and they're scrolling social media feeds about broader topics of personal and professional interest. So our content needs to be passively consumable in multiple formats. It needs to be focused well beyond our narrow area of expertise. It needs to be present in channels where buyers are actually spending time seeking unvarnished, peer-generated insights, education, and entertainment. I mean, think Reddit, even Instagram, where more B2B search occurs than you might expect, or industry-specific platforms, or maybe even Quora. We also need to be thinking about building community. And this may mean creating or participating in communities alongside competitors. This could feel uncomfortable, it could feel counterintuitive, but it's often the best way to reach influential user members of buying teams. Now, building a community takes time. It's a big project. You can expect to spend a couple of years of hard work before seeing momentum. So maybe you join one, or maybe you get a group of companies together to do it. But the alternative may be being left out of conversations entirely. We also need to leverage partner expertise. Every business has relationships with experts and influencers and vendors in adjacent spaces who are eager to share their expertise. So by helping them reach our audience while they help us reach theirs, we create a multiplier effect that builds awareness and trust organically. We also need to transform sales. We need to substantially improve our sales game, starting with a fundamental mindset shift. Our salespeople cannot wait for buyers to initiate projects. And let's not misunderstand, a lot of times prospecting is trying to find who's got an active project. Responding to inquiries isn't sales. That's customer service. Even if our marketing has been successful, waiting to compete on defined projects means that we're usually too late. Our sales reps have to prospect, not for pending projects, or not just for pending projects, but to build relationships and for opportunities to create projects using consultative sales. This requires a different skill set than most reps currently possess. Success requires business acumen and extraordinary consultative sales skills, and the ability to help buyers discover their requirements and establish urgency and develop compelling reasons to buy and confirm the financial impact. This approach is the only way to consistently move projects from nice to have to must have. few companies even realize that this is what their reps need to do. We just got so deeply embedded the idea that part of what we do is look for companies that have active projects where we can meet some BANT criteria, and that's where our salespeople need to focus. But if you go back to that Sixth Sense research, you realize that it's a fool's errand in many cases. We need to invest in people. This kind of transformation, expecting that level of performance from salespeople, means that we have to invest in evaluating the existing sales team to see who can adapt and who needs development and who might honestly be suited for this new approach. We need to return to a serious investment and commitment to training. Something that used to be routine, but now is really almost unusual. We need to develop extraordinary sales management that builds on training events with ongoing continuous coaching and role playing. And we need to find and develop really superb, I would say, second standard deviation sales talent, the top 5%, to compete consistently and successfully. And we need to build infrastructure. All this has to be supported by proper CRM implementation, clear frameworks for sales process, deal qualification scorecards, pre and post call planning templates, detailed playbooks for different situations of buyer types, etc. So, do you have to worry about this tonight? Do you have to change this tomorrow? Is this something where, at the end of 2025, you're going out of business if you haven't done it? No, absolutely not. A secular change tends to be gradual, as I said at the beginning. Companies got complacent during the 2010s. They came to believe that if they did digital marketing well enough, they'd get leads and sales would just have to close those leads. And that hasn't panned out. But instead of adjusting, most are just kind of lamenting falling close rates and missed quotas and deals ending in no decision and increasing competitive pressure. And they're just trying to do more of the same, hoping that doing more of it faster will somehow fix the problem. There's a path forward, but it requires major shifts in how we market and sell. And the good news is that, most of your competitors are probably still trying to push harder in the old playbook and make it work. Those who adapt first will create a significant competitive advantage that's going to be hard to overcome once it's established. And it can even potentially, provide an opportunity to differentiate your company through the way that you sell versus just more of this obsessing over product features that most buyers now really see as essentially interchangeable between most vendors. The key, though, is to start now. This isn't just a passing cycle. I think the data shows it. There are very substantial changes. I think the data from research and the data from most companies when they look in their CRM and see what's going on in terms of predictability of revenue, it's changing. They represent a fundamental shift in how industrial buyers research, evaluate, and purchase. And that means that we have to adapt. And the longer we wait to adapt, the harder it's going to be to catch up. So I would lay out for you that is an important topic to think about in 2025. And AI is accelerating these changes. If the first secular change in kind of professional sales and marketing in the industrial space was 100 years, call it 1900 to 2005, and the second one was 15 from 2005 to 2020. I can't tell you how long this one's going to be, but it's probably going to be shorter. So it's not a today problem, but it's not a 20 years from now problem. I think as we talk to guests, as I talk to guests, as we listen to the conversations on the Industrial Growth Institute podcast, keep in mind this changing environment and take their insights and put them into that paradigm as you think about how sales and marketing both need to adjust fairly acutely. And it's my job as a host to try to find guests that are going to help bring insights that will position you to be able to do that and take advantage of the opportunities. Thanks so much for listening. This is the second of two sequential special episodes with only me. Back with a guest next week. Hope you found some value in this. I'll drop show notes below that may make it easier to read than my rambling. And by all means, please like, share, comment, and please subscribe and pass this along to others who you think might find value in subscribing as well. I'm Ed Marsh, and I appreciate your joining me for this episode of the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. Thank you.